My kin skipped my lunch party, hacked my security systems, and formally requested 20% of my gross revenue. I finally met their demands with unassailable legal documentation and terminated their access permanently. I was 31 years old the evening I sat solitary in my gleaming, newly leased office space, brushing stray metallic confetti from a floor that hadn't seen a crowd. The Soho loft apartment still carried the sharp scent of fresh primer and brand new Berber carpet. I had spent nearly 10 months orchestrating every single detail, from the minimalist glass-walled meeting room to the high-end Italian espresso machine in the break area. This was meant to be the pinnacle moment of my career, the grand opening of the software firm I had diligently toiled toward for almost a decade. And yet, the custom-made ergonomic chair remained empty. The gourmet food I'd arranged with a local Brooklyn caterer was untouched, save for a single, lonely appetizer plate that I ate purely to avoid the waste. My name is Adam Reed, and for as long as I can recall, I've been the responsible one in my lineage, the one who kept the peace, appeared at every single family gathering, and offered financial help, even if it meant surviving on ramen for a full month. Kyle Reed, my younger sibling, had always been the family's golden child. Any action he took, no matter how reckless, was framed as ambitious, endearing, or simply Kyle being Kyle. When he quit Boston University after 3 semesters to pursue self-discovery, my mother and father proudly declared him a visionary entrepreneur. When he cycled through 4 different jobs in a 12-month period, relatives suggested he just hadn't landed on his true passion yet. Meanwhile, I quietly finished my degree, worked back-to-back shifts at a Dallas warehouse, and rented a compact studio unit with scarcely room for my bed and computer desk. Every spare dollar I amassed went toward this singular goal, launching my own enterprise, not a temporary side gig or a hobby, but a legitimate, officially registered Delaware LLC with full-time staff and a tangible office footprint built for longevity. So, when I finally sealed the lease agreement and opened the doors, I truly expected my family to beam with pride. I had disseminated sleek digital invitations 3 weeks beforehand and even printed high-gloss cards for my folks, knowing they'd claim they never received the email. I planned for imported Prosecco, curated background jazz, and a brief, heartfelt speech to express my gratitude. At 7 p.m., I stood by the entrance in my best charcoal suit, waiting for the first familiar face. By 7:15, I convinced myself they were just delayed by Manhattan traffic. At 8, I obsessively checked my phone. No missed calls, no texts, no on-our-way messages. By 9, I quietly told the caterer it could begin boxing up the untouched food. I didn't weep. I simply retreated to one of the empty workstations, sipped lukewarm Prosecco from a cheap plastic flute, and gazed at the deserted reception area. Every single sound echoed. My singular thought was, after all the years of prioritizing them, they couldn't spare one single night to show up? Then my phone buzzed. It was a photo on the family group chat. Kyle and my dad, Robert, stood grinning broadly in front of a new enormous Weber grill holding iced beers. The caption read, "Housewarming bash success in suburban New Jersey." I stared at the screen for a long time. There was no apologies for missing it. There was no congrats Adam, nothing. Just a casual, celebratory announcement that they had collectively, without any hesitation, opted for Kyle's housewarming over my company's debut. I couldn't respond. I felt physically ill. Yet a part of me wasn't remotely surprised. I cleared away the remaining decorations, locked the lights, and drove home. The next morning, a text arrived from my mother, Helen Reed. "We need to discuss potential earnings. Your brother feels he is owed a cut." I sat frozen, staring at the screen, my coffee cooling. A cut of what? He hadn't invested a dime, lifted a finger, or even attended the opening. My company hadn't generated its first dollar yet, but Kyle suddenly felt entitled to a percentage. I didn't reply instantly. I simply felt profoundly weary, not from the night before, but from years of being taken for granted. I could already predict the entire conversation. Helen would insist that blood is thicker than water. Robert would argue that Kyle needs this capital more than you do. Kyle was likely preparing an email listing reasons why his inspiration, whatever that was, deserved a percentage. For the first time in memory, something within me hardened.
This text wasn't a mere request. It was a preemptive strike. I had a choice: acquiesce, as I always had, or try a radically different approach. I set my phone aside, poured a second mug of coffee, and began to strategize. That's when it hit me. I wasn't as helpless as they presumed. I ignored Helen's text that day and the one after. Instead, I watched the group chat fill with more photos of Kyle's party and inside jokes I wasn't part of. Each post poured gasoline on the slow burn in my chest. By the end of the week, Helen sent another message. "Adam, please answer the phone. This is urgent." I finally answered, and Helen immediately launched into her typical routine. No greeting, no "how are you," just a clipped, "Adam, we've been trying to reach you for days." I paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough for her to register it. "What's the matter?" she finally asked, as if I were behaving erratically. "You're asking me about revenue," I said slowly, carefully choosing my words. "But none of you attended my company's launch." There was a lengthy delay. I pictured her standing in her kitchen, hand on her hip, already annoyed at being questioned. "Adam," Mom finally began, using that patient, condescending tone she reserved for my childhood infractions. "You know how critical Kyle's housewarming was. Everyone was there. It wouldn't have been appropriate to break up the family for one night." "One night?" I repeated, my voice flatter than I intended. This was not a casual dinner. This was the formal debut of my business, something I've poured years of my life into. She sighed, implying I was the overly dramatic one. "You're overreacting. Kyle is just starting out his life with Sarah Jones, and you'll have plenty of other events. Now, about the profits." I let out a jarring, humorless laugh that silenced her for a beat. "Profits, Helen? I haven't finished onboarding my first clients yet. There are no profits." "Well, Kyle was mentioning that since he essentially inspired you to launch the company, he should receive a sort of founder's equity, or at least a family discount, since he wants to use your services for his own ventures."
That completely floored me. "Inspired me?" I asked, utterly incredulous. "Helen, I've been designing this since I was in community college. Kyle didn't even know what I was working on until last month." She continued speaking, entirely dismissing my protest. "Look, your brother is trying to build a career. You're single. You don't have children. You can afford to be generous. Consider this helping the family." That same old line. I told her I had to disconnect and hung up before she could offer another word. That was the crucial moment I realized this problem would not simply fade away. My parents did not view the company as mine. They viewed it as the family's new convenient resource. Kyle was already first in line, plate in hand, ready to take what he believed was his due. Over the ensuing weeks, the situation only escalated. Kyle messaged me directly one afternoon. "Hey bro, I was thinking, can you hook me up with a partnership package? Like, I'll promote your company to my contacts, and you grant me a lifetime, free account. Seems fair." I stared at the message in astonishment. In his entire life, he had only ever promoted his own parties. When I didn't respond immediately, he sent another. "Helen said you'd probably say yes. Just let me know what content I need to post." That was the moment I chose non-reaction. A day later, Helen called again. "Adam, why are you ignoring your brother? He's attempting to help you expand your business." I calmly inquired if she understood what Kyle was actually asking for, effectively free labor. She brushed it off. "It's just family. You're making such a fuss over nothing." But the group chat told a different story. Kyle emailed a photo of his new sprawling deck furniture with the caption, "Thanks, Helen and Robert, for the advance." Another relative asked, "What about Adam? Didn't he just launch something?" Kyle responded. Yeah, but he's been acting a little weird about money lately. Helen chimed in. He's just stressed. He'll come around. They were having full-blown conversations about me, my money, and my company without my presence directly in front of me. Then came the final insult, an invitation to Kyle's networking barbecue. You absolutely must come, Helen cheerfully exclaimed when she called to follow up. Lots of people there who could be great for your business. I asked who would be attending. Oh, just some Kyle's college friends, people from his Gold's gym, Sarah Jones' parents. Bring a stack of business cards. I nearly laughed out loud. They had deliberately skipped my lunch, but now I was expected to show up at Kyle's party and solicit business from his buddies? I refused to go. That night, they sent a group photo of the entire family, smiling around the massive grill with the caption, "Such a blast. We missed you, Adam." The phrase, "we missed you," stung more than I expected, implying the fault for my absence lay squarely with me. The last straw dropped 3 weeks later. My accountant sent me an urgent email informing me that someone using Helen's personal email address had inquired about adding a family partner to my company's primary Chase bank account. They hadn't gained access, naturally, but the mere attempt made my stomach clench. I immediately called Helen. "Oh, that," she remarked, sounding offended. "I was merely trying to make things easier for you. This way Kyle could manage some of the payments and reduce your stress." I remained silent for a long moment. "Helen, never attempt that again," I finally stated, my voice low and steady. "You do not touch my accounts. You do not ask about my accounts. This company belongs to me." She sounded like she was choking up. "You don't have to be so protective. We're only trying to look out for you." But I no longer believed it. I hung up and sat in my office for a while, gazing out the window. The Boston skyline below was bustling with people living their own lives and making their own independent decisions. And here I was, allowing my family to infantilize me. For the very first time, I seriously considered what it truly meant to establish a solid boundary. Not just saying no once, but ensuring they could never attempt to pilfer from me. Again. The next day, Kyle texted me again. "Bro, did you check out the new patio heater I bought? You should come see it. Also, when are we getting that family discount? Robert said you're being stingy." My attitude completely shifted. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop, logged in to every single joint account bearing my name, shared Netflix, communal utilities, even the outdated family mobile plan, and began compiling a list. Because if they thought they were entitled to what I had built, they were about to discover how profoundly mistaken they were. And I wasn't going to give them a single warning this time. 3 weeks elapsed. I was submerged in onboarding my first legitimate clients, working grueling hours at the office, drinking excessive amounts of coffee, eating takeout, and feeling genuinely proud. For a time, I believed the family drama might subside if I remained quiet and hyper-focused on work. Then came the weekend that changed the dynamic. It was Saturday morning, and I had finally decided to sleep in for the first time in weeks. Around 8 a.m., my phone began to buzz incessantly. Helen called first, followed by Robert, Kyle, and then Helen again. I groaned and rolled over, ignoring the frantic calls. A minute later, a notification popped up on my company's internal security dashboard, flagged access attempt. Someone had tried to log in from an unknown device. I sat bolt upright in bed. I opened my laptop to check the activity logs. Sure enough, there had been 4 consecutive failed login attempts originating from an IP address disconcertingly close to my parents' residence in Connecticut. Someone had been attempting to brute force their way into my corporate account, and not casually. They were guessing passwords. My stomach plotted. I immediately dialed Helen. "Oh,
"Oh, good, you're finally up," she replied cheerfully, as if this were a typical conversation. "We were just discussing how to alleviate your workload. Kyle and I thought if we had access to some of the internal systems, we could help process vendor payments for you, maybe keep track of client invoices." "You tried to log in?" I said bluntly. Silence. "You tried to access my company account?" I asked, my voice dangerously escalating. "Well, yes, but only because you've been so deliberately secretive lately. We just thought maybe you were overwhelmed. This way we could—" I cut her off. "None. You do not touch my company. You don't even ask before attempting something like that."
She sounded genuinely offended. "Adam, you're making us sound like criminals. We are your family. We only want to help." I let out a quick, bitter laugh. "Help, Helen. You skipped my launch. You gossiped about me in the group chat. You demand money I don't even have. And now you attempt to break into my accounts. That is not help." She sniffed, and her voice took on that sharp, biting edge I knew so well. "You are being ungrateful. Robert and I raised you, financially supported you through school, and this is the thanks we receive? Locking us out?" I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to control my breathing. "You didn't pay for my education, Helen. I did. You didn't support me when I was saving for this company. You barely knew what I was doing until I signed the lease." "That's not the point," she replied coldly. "This family shares everything. You've been acting like you're superior to us, hoarding your success. It's selfish." I did not trust myself to utter another word. I simply ended the call. Kyle texted me 20 minutes later. "Seriously, dude? Helen says you screamed at her. Chill. She was only making sure you don't screw anything up. Also, I already told Sarah we'd get that family plan discount, so don't embarrass me." I put the phone down, shaking slightly. That was the pivotal moment. I knew it wasn't just about simple boundaries anymore. They genuinely believed they were entitled to the fruits of my labor. By Monday, the situation had intensified yet again. When I arrived at my office, I found a sealed manila envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a handwritten note from Robert. "Adam, we've been patient, but your attitude lately is unacceptable. Helen and I have discussed it, and we believe it's time you start giving back to the family in a meaningful way. We propose a family stipend, 20% of your monthly gross revenue to be equitably distributed between your parents and your brother. Consider this a way to honor your origins."
I sat at my desk, clutching the letter so tightly the paper crinkled. My father, the man who hadn't bothered to attend the single most important night of my professional life, was now formally demanding a portion of my revenue, which comes before expenses and salaries, not just profits. It was so utterly ludicrous, I almost burst out laughing, but then I realized they were completely serious. That night I didn't sleep at all. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, vividly recalling every single time I had rescued Kyle from trouble. I once covered his rent after he blew his entire paycheck on a foolish investment scheme. When I co-signed a loan for his truck, he defaulted on 4 payments, causing my credit rating to plummet. Helen once called me distraught after Kyle got into a drunken brawl at a bar in San Diego and needed money for legal fees. Every single time I showed up, this was their repayment, attempting to worm their way into my financial livelihood before it had even begun to flourish. The following weekend was the final nail in the coffin. I was having lunch with a colleague when I received a notification that my company's workplace alarm had been triggered. My stomach lurched violently. When I raced back to the building, I found my brother, Kyle, loitering outside the main door, fiddling nervously with the keypad. "What exactly are you doing?" I shouted, my voice echoing down the empty hall. He jumped, looking momentarily guilty before forcing a wide smile. Relax, man. Helen said you wouldn't find if I grabbed a few things. I told Sarah I'd give her a tour of the place. You tried to break in? I asked, my tone glacial. It's not breaking in if it's family, he retorted, shrugging as if it were the most logical thing in the world. I just stared at him for a second, utterly speechless. You need to leave, I finally stated, each word measured. He scoffed. Wow, seriously? You think you're too good for us now? I took a step closer and lowered my voice. If you ever attempt to enter this office again without my explicit permission, I will call the police.
His smug grin finally faltered. You wouldn't dare. He stalked off, muttering something barely audible beneath his breath. When the door slammed shut behind him, I double-locked it and remained standing there, my hands trembling. That was the hard line. They had crossed the boundary from mere disrespect to blatant criminal intrusion. I ignored all calls and texts for the remainder of the weekend. I sat at my desk meticulously reviewing every system I had, business accounts, personal banking, security settings, and began locking things down systematically, realizing this was no longer just about boundaries. This was war. And if they were going to treat my firm like a personal ATM, they were about to discover what happened when I permanently shut down the service. I woke up that Monday feeling as though I'd been hit by a truck. It wasn't my limbs that ached. It was my chest, my stomach, and my head. Everything felt heavy. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time watching my phone vibrate repeatedly. Helen called twice, followed by Robert and Kyle. Each one left voicemails that grew increasingly angry. Adam, Helen's voice snapped on the last one, your brother says you threatened to call the police on him. This is absurd. You need to apologize before this family completely fractures. I deleted the message without listening to the rest, stood up and went into the kitchen. I made coffee automatically and sat at the table, staring at the steam rising from the mug. My family, however dysfunctional, had been my social safety net for decades. They were loud, entitled, and manipulative, yet they were still my family, and since childhood I had been conditioned to prioritize their feelings to maintain harmony. But now, maintaining that brittle peace was fundamentally destroying me. I barely registered the tears silently streaming down my cheeks, not loud, racking sobs, but quiet, hot tears that blurred my vision until I had to set the mug down to avoid spilling. I rarely cried. I had trained myself not to. But that morning, I felt hollow, as if all the energy I had poured into creating this professional dream had been entirely drained by the very people who should have been celebrating it.
I called in sick to the office that day. My new assistant covered for me, while I sat on the couch with my laptop, neither working nor watching TV, just staring. I opened the family group chat and scrolled all the way back, rereading months of texts, every snide joke at my expense, every compliment given to Kyle for doing the bare minimum, every instance where my parents casually dismissed my accomplishments as insignificant. As I read, something profound began to shift. Initially, there was only a searing rage, but beneath the rage, there was a deep, aching realization. I had worked tirelessly to earn their acceptance and make them proud, but it was never, ever going to be enough. By the time the sun set, I had made my final decision. I wasn't going to try anymore. The following few weeks were intensely difficult. I started completely avoiding all family gatherings. If Helen phoned, I let it go to voicemail. If Robert texted, I ignored it. I worked even longer hours, often sleeping on the office couch simply to avoid the possibility of encountering them. But the silence didn't make them vanish. Instead, they intensified their efforts. Helen physically showed up at my Soho loft one afternoon, aggressively pounding on the door as if she owned the building. When I opened it a crack, she forced her way inside. Adam, this is childish. You can't keep cutting us off just because you're angry. Your brother is hurt. He was only trying to help. Trying to help by breaking into my office? I asked, my voice flat with exhaustion. You're exaggerating, she replied, waving a dismissive hand. Himir wanted to see the space. You should be flattered. He cares enough to get involved. I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt no guilt. I'm busy, I replied, simply closing the door firmly before she could respond further. I leaned against it, my heart pounding, but I also felt a strange, solid sense of relief. The next weekend, I deliberately skipped a long-planned family dinner. Helen sent me 20 consecutive texts, from veiled guilt trips to barely hidden anger to outright threats. If you keep this up, don't expect us to support you when things get tough. Driven by stubbornness, I didn't respond to any of them. However, the silence had consequences. Work became a struggle. I was perpetually exhausted. My mind constantly rehearsed conflicts that hadn't occurred yet. I stopped sleeping through the night, waking up abruptly at 4 a.m., breaking out in a cold sweat when I remembered Kyle standing at my office door, smirking as if everything were a joke. I was short-tempered with my employees, curt with friends, and prone to errors on minor tasks. One particular night, I stayed at the office until dawn, just meticulously running financial models, terrified that I'd overlook one vital detail and the entire business would collapse. My family would swoop in and say, "See? This is why you needed us." But beneath all the stress and fatigue, something else began to crystallize. Clarity.
One Friday evening, I sat in my office with a legal pad and simply began writing a list. I cataloged every account in my name that my relatives might still access, every shared bill, streaming subscription, and outdated account that still listed Kyle or my parents as secondary users. Then I itemized all the potential ways they could try to interfere with my business, from trying to access accounts, to calling vendors, to showing up unexpectedly. It wasn't just a to-do list, it was a comprehensive blueprint for defense. I knew that if I didn't act decisively now, this conflict would be endless. I spent the entire weekend executing that list. I called my bank and mandated stricter security protocols. I enabled two-factor authentication on every single platform. I moved my personal savings to a separate account with a completely different national bank. I consulted with my corporate attorney about legally securing the company's operating documents so that absolutely no modifications could be made without my sole authorization. Each completed step made me feel incrementally lighter. By Sunday night, I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the office ceiling, and felt a sensation I hadn't felt in months. Calm. Not joy, not triumph, but profound tranquility. Because for the first time, I wasn't merely reacting to my family's moves. I was prepared. Deep down, I knew this was only the start. Whatever their next move was, I'd be ready. And this time, they wouldn't see it coming. It's astonishing how much lighter life feels once you stop desperately seeking external validation. Something fundamental changed inside me after that weekend of lockdown. I stopped obsessively checking for texts from Helen and Robert, stopped rehearsing arguments in my head, and stopped wondering what they were saying about me in the group chat. Instead, I began to pour all my energy into what I could control: creating. The next Monday, I was at the office before sunrise. The financial district was quiet, still stirring, and for the first time in months, I felt genuine excitement to be there. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, sat down with my notebook, and drafted the following 6 months of corporate growth strategy. While my initial few clients were small, word of mouth spread rapidly within the tech community. One excellent referral led to another, and I soon had meetings scheduled with much larger players, contracts that could solidify the firm's finances for the entire year. Without the constant, draining background noise of my family pushing me, I was sharper and monumentally more focused. One by one, the major deals began to close. I'll never forget the first significant client I landed, a mid-sized marketing firm in Chicago that had been searching for months. After our final pitch meeting, the CEO shook my hand and said, "Adam, you clearly live and breathe what you're building. That's why we're choosing you." I walked out of that office grinning like an idiot. When the contract documents arrived, I stayed late to meticulously double-check every figure. When I finally looked at the projected revenue estimates, I leaned back in my chair and simply stared at the ceiling, a slow smile spreading across my face. This was no longer about sheer survival. This was proven growth. Growth brought with it new possibilities. Over the next few weeks, I upgraded the office's primary network infrastructure, hired a part-time administrative assistant, and even brought on a professional consultant to help streamline our operations. Each improvement made the firm run more smoothly, freeing up my time to focus on high-level strategy. It felt magnificent. Even better, watching something I'd labored on for years finally truly blossom.
The best part, though, wasn't the revenue or the success. It was confidence. I stopped flinching when my phone vibrated with a message from Helen or Kyle. I stopped dreading seeing them at the local Whole Foods. In fact, I started completely ignoring them. Helen left me a verbose voicemail filled with heavy sighs and dramatic pauses. "Adam, this has been going on long enough. Your brother is hurt. Your father and I are hurt. We just want to sit down and figure out a collaborative way to work together. Family is meant to share, after all." I didn't return the call. Instead, I listened to the message twice, calmly deleted it, and returned to reviewing a new contract worth more than my previous 4 clients combined. And then, something fascinating happened. Kyle texted me again, this time with a legitimate question rather than a demand. "Hey bro, you know anyone hiring? Things are kind of tight right now." I stared at the screen for a long time. I could have ignored him. I could have gloated. Instead, I typed, "No, sorry. Things are incredibly busy here." That was all. The power dynamic had fundamentally reversed. I didn't need to yell or argue. I didn't have to justify my decisions. For the first time in my adult life, I had the luxury of simply not participating. And the silence drove them mad. The texts grew more frequent. Kyle asked if I could loan him money to cover his rent payment. Helen asked if I could cover a family trip they had already booked because they were a little short this month. Robert sent me a note saying he'd heard about my major new contracts and felt it was only right to share some of the success. I did not reply to any of it. Instead, I continued to expand. Within a few short months, my revenue had doubled again. I relocated the company to a significantly larger space in a vibrant downtown location with more natural light and room for future expansion. I purchased stylish new furniture, upgraded all our software licenses, and even hired a junior project manager to help alleviate my workload. For the first time, I felt like a genuine CEO. And that's when I started thinking about the next step. Not just surviving and thriving, but leveraging my position to permanently safeguard myself. I established a separate holding company for my core assets. I moved all my intellectual property into it and structured things so that if anyone ever tried to intervene legally, they would have to navigate multiple complex layers just to determine what I even owned. I also revised my will, something most people my age don't consider, to ensure that everything was tightly locked down and unreachable by anyone who might attempt to claim a piece of it for the good of the family. Each step made me feel stronger, calmer, and more in command. But the irony was that the more I strategically withdrew, the louder my family became. Helen began sending guilt-infused emails about missing her little boy. Kyle posted obscure, resentful rants on his social media about self-centered people who forget their roots. Robert left voicemails indicating he needed to discuss the future of the family. Kyle even appeared outside my office again, but this time he couldn't enter. I'd upgraded the security system to require biometric access cards and installed multiple hidden cameras. I watched him on the live feed, pacing, knocking once or twice, and then retreating. When I received an alert on my phone that the system had recorded the footage, I saved it, just in case. Because as pleased as I was with how far I'd come, one thing was certain. They weren't finished. They would try again. And when they did, I wasn't going to just sit there and absorb the attack. I was going to be prepared, not just to protect everything I had built, but to make it unequivocally clear that they could no longer treat me this way. And for the first time, I felt a strange sense of anticipation because I was no longer just surviving their onslaught, I was actively waiting for them to make their next move so I could finally make mine. By early spring, my company was in the best condition it had ever been. I had a small, dedicated team, recurring contracts with multiple mid-size organizations, and comfortable cash flow to cover payroll. The business no longer felt fragile. It felt stable. And that stability gave me the mental bandwidth to contemplate the big picture. I wasn't just building a corporation anymore, I was constructing a fortress. One Friday afternoon, I was reviewing the final paperwork with my corporate attorney, signing off on some last-minute protections for the holding company, when he casually asked, "You mentioned some family disputes last time we met. Do you still want to include a clause legally prohibiting them from ever having financial authority over the business?" "Yes," I replied, without the slightest hesitation. He nodded, making a swift notation in the document. "Smart move. You'd be surprised how many disputes we see once a startup starts doing well. Families can be complicated." I almost laughed. Complicated was a profound understatement. Following the meeting, I decided to take a long, aimless walk through the bustling San Francisco financial district. The weather was mild, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to slow down and simply think. That's when I noticed something odd. I hadn't heard from my folks in almost 3 weeks. No texts, no voicemails, no unwelcome visitors. Initially, I assumed they had finally given up. But then I received a call from a casual acquaintance, a family friend who ran a small independent accounting firm. "Adam, I just thought you should know," the man added, his voice hushed. "Your brother stopped by my office last week asking specific questions about how to set up a business partnership, and he mentioned your company by name." I stopped dead in my tracks. "What exactly did he say?" "He said you were probably going to make him a partner soon, but he wanted to get ahead of the paperwork so it wouldn't take too long." Sounded pretty confident about it. I thanked him for the immediate alert, hung up, and stood on the busy sidewalk for a minute, letting a slow, purposeful anger wash over me. Kyle was definitely preparing a major move, and knowing my brother, it wasn't going to be subtle. That weekend, I finally reopened the family group chat, not to respond, but to observe. Sure enough, there it was. Helen had posted, "We're thinking of having a family meeting next Sunday to discuss some very exciting opportunities." Kyle replied, "Yeah, can't wait to share what I've been working on." Robert's message, "Adam, you really should attend. This could be huge for all of us." I put the phone down and felt a calculated shift within me. For months, I had been purely on the defensive, blocking, locking down, trying to prevent them from interfering. But suddenly, I had an overwhelming advantage, because the simple truth was that my company was no longer a vulnerable startup. It was profitable, legally sound, and secure. And thanks to the complete corporate restructure, I was the only person with the legal authority to make decisions about it. Even if Kyle walked into an attorney's office tomorrow and claimed he was owed a share, there was nothing they could possibly do. The best part? They had no idea. That night, I sat down at my desk with a legal pad and began writing. This time, instead of taking notes, I made battle plans. I identified every single point of contact I still maintained with my family, every possible account they might use, and every small connection they had to my life. Then, I outlined the methods for severing each one, gradually, strategically, and without any warning. I also began to view my company differently, not just as a source of income, but as an impenetrable fortress. What would it take to make it absolutely invulnerable? I upgraded the security system again, this time adding biometric access and a new server lockbox. I had my lawyer draft a formal, notarized document specifically prohibiting any family members from ever receiving shares or voting rights. I even spoke with a public relations specialist about what would happen if someone tried to drag my company into a public fight and how we could control the narrative proactively. Piece by piece, I was constructing an environment where my family literally could not reach me. And then something completely unexpected happened, giving me the final piece of leverage I didn't realize I needed. One of my new, larger clients was a major real estate developer who happened to be negotiating a large home renovation deal with my brother, Kyle.
During a casual lunch discussion, the developer mentioned Kyle's name and asked if we were related. I kept my expression neutral and simply nodded. "Funny guy," the developer replied, chuckling. "He's trying to get us to front him a huge chunk of money for the job before he delivers. Said he's good for it because his family business is doing so well." My eyebrows arched slightly. Family business. "Yeah," he continued, "he said his brother owns a company that could back him up if necessary." I did not correct him. I just smiled faintly and made a mental note. Because now I had something my brother didn't believe I possessed. Influence. Quiet, unobtrusive influence. The kind that didn't involve shouting or fighting, just a carefully placed comment here and there to ensure the truth surfaced when it mattered most. By the time the family meeting arrived, I was completely prepared. Not just emotionally, but strategically. I had all the legal documents proving my exclusive ownership. I had backed up copies of every security log that revealed their attempted meddling. I had financial data that clearly illustrated how much solo work I had done to make the company succeed. Most importantly, I had the quiet confidence that whatever they tried next, I could effortlessly manage it.
The night before the meeting, I sat in my office long after everyone else had gone home, admiring the space I had painstakingly created from scratch. The polished concrete floors, the gentle hum of the server rack in the corner, and the soft glow of the city lights outside. This was mine, and they were going to learn that lesson in full tomorrow. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, determined smile creeping across my lips. The preparation was complete. All that remained was for me to make my final move after they had made theirs. The family meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at my parents' residence in Connecticut, the same dining room where I had spent countless holidays sitting at the kids' table, while Kyle held court as the center of attention. This time, I didn't feel like a young man entering hostile territory. I arrived punctually in a tailored suit, cool and perfectly composed. Helen raised her eyebrows as she opened the door. "Well, don't you look formal?" she asked, a mix of amusement and genuine concern in her voice. "This is a business meeting," I replied evenly as I stepped inside. Kyle was already seated at the dining table, leaning back in his chair with a smug, expectant expression. Robert sat at the head, looking solemn as if presiding over a critical board session. "Glad you could finally join us," Robert responded. "Let's sit down and discuss this like adults." I took a seat directly across from Kyle, who quickly launched into his pitch. "So here's the plan," he explained, spreading out a few papers as if this were his personal boardroom. "I've secured a fantastic new project, but I need some initial capital to get it off the ground. Since your company is doing so well, we figured you could front the investment. Just a small, fixed percentage of your revenue each month, and we'll consider you an official partner." He leaned back, clearly anticipating immediate applause. Helen nodded approvingly. "See, this is exactly what we meant about teamwork. Everyone contributes, and everyone benefits." I listened silently for a few more minutes, my hands neatly folded on the table. When they finally stopped speaking, waiting for my eager agreement, I slowly slid a simple manila folder across the table. "What's this?" Robert inquired. "Documentation," I explained quietly. "My company's operating agreement, ownership records, financials, everything, proving that I am the sole founder, shareholder, and decision maker. And before you ask, no, there will be no partnership, no revenue sharing, and no family stipend. This company is mine, legally and permanently." Kyle frowned. "Whoa, what's with all the lawyer talk? We're family. You don't have to make it so formal." "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "I do. Because the last time we had a casual understanding, someone tried to access my accounts without permission. Someone tried to get into my office, and someone sent me a letter formally demanding 20% of my revenue as if it were their birthright. Helen bristled instantly. "That was your father's idea." "I have it in writing," I said, my voice forceful yet utterly calm.
And if anything like that happens again, I will not hesitate to involve law enforcement. The large room fell into a heavy, unsettling silence. For a long moment, I could only hear the faint, insistent ticking of the wall clock. "You wouldn't," Robert finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. "I would," I answered simply. "I have security footage, login logs, emails, and a lawyer who is fully briefed. This isn't a threat. It's a boundary. You will not cross it again." Kyle snorted, attempting to dismiss the seriousness. "You think you're so important now, huh? Just because you're making some money?" I smiled, not harshly, but with quiet composure. "No, Kyle, I think I finally learned that I don't owe you my success, and I definitely don't owe you access to it." Before they could even formulate a response, I reached into my bag and pulled out a stack of papers. Termination notices for every joint account and bill that still bore my name. "These," I commented as I laid them down, "are the last remaining ties between my finances and this family. The mobile phone plan, the streaming accounts, the insurance policies, all canceled or transferred, effective immediately." Helen's jaw dropped open. "You can't just—" "I can, and I did," I stated. Kyle's arrogant grin had completely vanished, replaced with a flush of raw anger. "This is ridiculous. You're acting like some kind of dictator. All we wanted was a little support." "You wanted control," I replied, meeting his glare directly. "And you wanted it without doing any of the work. That ends today." For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to defend myself. I felt unwavering. I stood up, calmly gathering my folder and placing it back into my briefcase. "This conversation is finished," I stated gently. "If you wish to maintain a relationship with me, it will be on terms of mutual respect. Otherwise, consider this the last time we will ever meet like this." I walked out of the house without looking back, but the resolution was not complete. Not yet. Over the next 3 weeks, I ensured the message was received and remembered. Kyle attempted to name-drop my company to a potential major client, but they called me first to confirm the supposed partnership. I calmly informed them that there was no collaboration and never would be. The deal instantly fell through. Helen tried to employ guilt, emailing me photos of family events with captions like, "We miss you," but I never replied. When she finally called, demanding an explanation for my silence, I answered calmly, "I'm busy running a company. You know, the one you all ignored, and I don't have time for manipulation."
Word spread quickly among our shared acquaintances. Family friends began reaching out, not to condemn me, but to quietly express their understanding. Some even admitted they were proud of me for finally standing up for myself, a compliment I had never once received from my own parents. And the best part was, the more they pressured, the calmer I became. I didn't yell, didn't quarrel, and didn't send emotional countertexts. I simply enforced my boundaries quietly and consistently, every single time. It eventually began to sink in. Calls became less frequent. The messages became shorter. The demands ceased entirely as they collectively realized that the old Adam, the one who would succumb to guilt and show up with his wallet open simply to maintain a false peace, had vanished. In his place was someone they could no longer control. It didn't happen overnight. For a few weeks, the resulting silence was almost unsettling. No texts, no calls, no unexpected knocks on my office door. I hoped they had finally accepted the message, but then the consequences began to hit my brother. One Friday morning, I was reviewing quarterly financial forecasts when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. It was one of Kyle's contractors. Sorry for bothering you, the man added, but your brother told us you were his financial backer. We just wanted to confirm before moving forward with materials. A calm, purposeful rage washed over me, and I answered, no, evenly. My company does not back any of Kyle's ventures. Please make sure you get everything in writing from him before you start work. The man thanked me, sounding both shocked and immensely relieved. It was clear he had been burned before. Kyle called me, absolutely enraged later that day. You just cost me a contract, he shouted the moment I picked up. No, Kyle, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. You cost yourself a contract by lying about my company's involvement. You're such a jerk. Do you know how difficult it is out here? You could have simply said yes and helped me out. I don't reward dishonesty, I remarked simply before hanging up. That marked the true beginning of his professional downfall. Within a month, I learned from a mutual contact that Kyle had lost 3 additional clients. Word had circulated that he was fundamentally untrustworthy, promising financial backing he didn't actually possess. Meanwhile, my firm continued its upward trajectory. I signed 3 major new contracts and hired an additional full-time team member. We relocated to an even larger, more prestigious office, taking a full floor to ourselves.
Then came the family cookout. The first one I'd been invited to in months. Helen called me directly. Adam, Helen replied, her voice uncharacteristically soft. We'd really love for you to come. Things have been strained. Your father and I genuinely want to talk. I considered saying no, but something inside me knew this was the optimal time. When I arrived, the atmosphere was palpably tense. Kyle sat hunched over the picnic table, visibly unhappy and picking listlessly at his plate. Robert looked profoundly exhausted. Helen seemed to have practiced a speech beforehand. Adam, she began, we just want to put all this mess behind us. Family is more important than money, after all. I almost laughed, but I kept my face utterly cool. Funny, I replied, because money was the only thing you wanted from me for months. Helen flinched. That's not fair. It's completely fair, I replied gently. You skipped the most important night of my life to attend a housewarming. You tried to hack into my accounts. You demanded a percentage of my revenue before I'd even broken even. And when I finally said no, you tried to emotionally blackmail me into giving you access anyway. Robert sighed. We made mistakes, but surely you can find it in your heart to forgive. I can't, I replied, cutting him off directly. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it certainly doesn't mean allowing you to continue taking. Kyle finally spoke up, his tone bitter. You think you're superior to us now just because you have money. I turned to him, calm as always. No, Kyle. I think I've stopped letting you use me as your financial safety net, and you don't like it. He had no answer. I stood there, deliberately taking my time, letting the heavy silence linger. Here's the truth, I stated, looking directly into the eyes of each of them. I built this company from nothing. I sacrificed years of my life for it, and you didn't just fail to support me. You actively tried to take from me. That ends now. We will not be doing business together. We will not be sharing accounts. If you want a relationship with me, it will be as family members, not as shareholders. I began walking toward the gate, but hesitated and turned back one final time. And if you ever attempt to cross that line again, to get into my accounts, my office, or my business, I will treat you the exact same way I'd treat any other trespasser.
Their expressions were a mixture of shocked disbelief and cold rage, but not one of them uttered another word. I drove away without a second glance. Driving home, I experienced a sensation I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not the frail, nervous kind I used to rely on, but something strong and robust. That night, I sat in my new, spacious office and looked out at the magnificent downtown skyline. My team had left hours ago. The space was utterly quiet, save for the gentle, steady hum of the servers. I reflected on all the times I had contorted myself for my family, sacrificing my own deepest aspirations to keep them content. And I smiled, for they had finally and fully understood. The next morning, a text arrived from Helen. "We will respect your wishes. We just hope someday you'll come back to the family." I didn't respond directly. Instead, I took a photograph of the office, the polished floors, the tidy workstations, and the name of my company glowing subtly on the wall, and forwarded it to the family group chat with a single, clear message. "You had your chance to be a part of this. That chance is gone." And then, I permanently muted the chat. I leaned back in my chair, shut my laptop, and took a deep, satisfying breath. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in. I felt as though I had finally created a life and future entirely my own. If this narrative resonated with you, please consider supporting our channel for more genuine stories of family resilience. Thank you for watching.